Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. On this week's podcast, I've invited Rabbanit Yaffa Batya DaCosta. She is the founder and CEO of Ezra L'Anosim since 2005, which is an Israeli nonprofit. Her organization is made up of 40-plus managing directors from all over the world and many committed supporters and activists globally, most of whom are themselves from the B'nai Anusim. People have joined this organization over many years to work with Yaffa Batya in helping the B'nai Anusim to make a full and public comeback to the faith and traditions of their Sephardi Jewish ancestors. Yaffa Batya had her 30th anniversary of being involved with this movement this past Purim of 2022. Yaffa Batya is herself from the B'nai Anusim, and she made a full return, according to Jewish law and custom, in 2000. She has an extensive business management consulting, coaching, and projects management background in working with corporate 100 companies in the United States of America. She has, over the years, worked with many B'nai Noach, too. She has also led or facilitated some Jewish-Christian relations events and interfaith groups. She is currently writing a book called The Puzzle of Calling a Dog's Tail a Leg: Cancel Culture from Ancient to Modern Times, which she plans to publish by the end of this calendar year. The website of her organization is bnaianusim.org. That's BNEIANOUSIM.org. And her email address is yaffabatya@yahoo.com. Ladies and gentlemen, if you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms you use to access your favorite podcasts. I also want to remind you that it's important for you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. Rebbitzin, welcome to PJTN Podcast.
Oh, thank you very much, Laurie. I really appreciate your having me on today.
Well, you have a story that is very important and quite interesting to me personally as well. I want to just begin by introducing our audience to PJTN, just in case there are members that are tuning in today that are not aware of the organization, so that you'll understand why we are having a conversation about this important topic about the B'nai Anusim. I want to begin by just letting our audience know that PJTN's mission is to educate Christians about our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren in Israel against the rise of global anti-Semitism. We accomplish that mission by producing award-winning documentary films and programs like our Focus on Israel show, and distribute those programs to a global viewing audience of over 2 billion potential viewers, which leads us to our conversation with Yaffa Batya today. As a media veteran and documentarian, I am constantly looking to produce and distribute films and programs that effectively inform and educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren in Israel to counter the growing threat of anti-Semitism in this and future generations. Many of you in our audience know that for 5 years now, we have been compiling research in general on the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and specifically the Jews who were lost from the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. The book of Obadiah actually references the dispersed ones of Spain. The prophets foretold that one day a second Exodus would occur. In fact, the Bible states that the second Exodus would trump the first Exodus from Egypt to the extent that we will no longer discuss the first Exodus. Yaffa Batya, you have been involved in the production of a film on this topic titled The Children of the Inquisition. Before we discuss the film, tell our audience about your organization and why you have dedicated your life to tell this story.
Okay. So part of it, the reason why I do this is because I am from the B'nai Nussim myself. My mother's family was from the Portuguese Azores Islands in almost the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And they immigrated to the United States around 1915 was the first part of the family that came over, and then 1917. And my great grandmother was a classic crypto Jew. Okay, she would not go to church. She had all kinds of customs and traditions that were Jewish that were passed down in the family, usually to the women, by the women to the women. This is classic crypto Judaism or secret Judaism, it's also called. And so when I discovered this, and that's a story in and of itself, when I discovered my roots, that they were crypto Jews, then I started studying more about, well, what is Judaism, since these people were Jews, but they were Jews secretly. And then I went through a whole process of a halakhic return. Halakha is simply Jewish law. So I did it with rabbis, okay, who confirmed my Jewishness. Okay. And there are other people who've done this. And my organization, after I made Aliyah, on the return certificate that I received, because I'm called a returnee, I'm not a convert. Okay, which also that's good if people want to do that. But I'm not a convert, I'm a returnee. So after I made Aliyah, 6 months later, I formed this nonprofit in Israel to continue my work, which I had been doing in the US already, of helping other people if they wanted to research their roots, if they wanted to understand more about crypto Judaism or whatever. And this film is a film documentary, full feature film, 2 hours, by the way, called Children of the Inquisition. It's focused on the children. Now, it does talk a little bit about the history called the Inquisition, okay, and what happened, which is such a horrible, horrific thing that happened. So many Christians find it just crazy, unbelievable that anybody could do to the Jews what was done in Spain and then later in Portugal. But the point is that what happened as a result of being forcibly converted to Roman Catholicism specifically, of course, as you know, these people went underground and their Judaism was hidden and secret. And so the film, again, talks a little bit about the Inquisition, but focuses more on the children, or we call descendants, of the forced converts, so 500 years ago. And the fact that when these people emigrated to the New World and came to Mexico and the Caribbean and northern South America, Brazil and Peru and Bolivia and all of these countries, they were still secretly Jewish, hiding as in the Catholic world because these countries were Roman Catholic, and the Inquisition followed them. So the Inquisition, most people don't know this, unfortunately, lasted over 300 years. Some people say 400 years if you go into the 14th century where it really all began. And a lot of people don't understand this, that our people maintain their Jewishness. A forced conversion in Judaism to some other religion is not accepted as these people being Christian because it was forced. It wasn't their free will choice. Okay. So that's what the film is about. And we're screening it September 11th and September 12th over a Zoom meeting. And there'll be a little bit of Q&A, a few questions I'll answer. But then people will have access to me after that through email, on Facebook and whatever, if they wanted to continue to learn about this and talk about it, or talk about what I'm writing in my book, because the Inquisition is a part of what I talk about in my book that I'm writing.
Mhm.
That's the main story.
That's fantastic. And I just for our audience, I want to just share as an aside that Yaffa Batya's last name is DaCosta, and I had cousins by the name of Costa in the United States. And um, Batya, your family came from the Azores. My family came from Saint Michael in the Azores. They came over my great grandparents came over in the early 1900s. And it's interesting that you came out of that region, and the fact that your last name is DaCosta, which obviously Costa is the derivative of what came out of my ancestors leaving. They changed their name, and you find that that's not unusual for people to change aspects of the spelling of their name once they came to the United States. So, just for the audience, Yaffa Batya and I are long distance cousins. We've got generations that it was not only the Costas, there were several families that kind of kept together. Even when they came here to the United States in the early 1900s, they migrated. They lived in Rhode Island, Massachusetts area. So I think it's just a divine appointment that God would bring our lives, our paths together with such a similar story.
So my grandfather, my mother's father, I took my mother's maiden name. Okay. This is not my given name at birth. So I took my mother's maiden name. So that's her father's name. And the family was known as Costa. Okay. And then one day I'm reading in the Jewish Britannia or Britannia, however you call this book about Jewish history, about a man named Uriel DaCosta. And I'm scratching my head and I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if our name was originally DaCosta. Okay. Because what happened was a lot of people, Ashkenazi Jews, all kinds of people, when they came through Ellis Island, their names were changed. And a lot of Da Silva, all these Portuguese names that had the DA or DE, okay, those two letters were dropped. So I wondered about this, and I finally did get, that's also a long story, my grandmother's birth certificate from the Azores, my grandfather's certificate, their marriage certificate, and my great-grandmother's birth certificate, okay? And sure enough, on those birth certificates, my grandfather's name was DaCosta, okay? And so it's fascinating that his name got changed, I'm sure, at Ellis Island, okay? So, and, okay, the time of, the early 19th century is when my people came over also, my mother's family, okay? So I'm sure they knew other people that had immigrated right around that time. And by the way, the city that my ancestors came from on San Miguel, the same island you mentioned, the city is Ponta Delgada. Do you know the city where your DaCosta people are from?
Yep, I'm not familiar with that city. No. Mm-mm.
Okay, that's the capital of the Azores. That city is the capital. So on the immigration records, which I also found when they came into the United States, New Bedford, where they landed, where they ended up, had immigration records. It also says where they came from. They came from Ponta Delgada, and that's where these birth certificates came from, the city records of the city of Ponta Delgada. So we actually really might be very close to being cousins.
Yeah, I know we've hired a genealogist to research my family because the Cardoza and my great grandfather on his deathbed called his children together, and this is my father's mother, her dad. And on his deathbed, he called his children together and told them that he could not leave this earth until he told them that they were Jewish. My great grandmother had long been deceased by that time. So it was interesting that they kept it from their children for a whole, a lifetime. it boggles the mind that they wouldn't tell their children. But you find that this story is not unusual in the research that you've done, that more and more people are starting to find out about their, especially those of Hispanic or Portuguese descent, are starting to find out that their family was Jewish.
Well, it's actually very common, and the reason why they didn't tell the children was for fear that the children would tell somebody else and they would be found out, and then it would be back to Inquisition times where they and their children would be killed, would be murdered for it, okay? So that fear passed down in the families, okay, which is why adults wouldn't tell their children, even adult children, okay, until their deathbed when they figured, this is my last chance to pass down that information. But the other major, almost 100% when I talk to people, and I work with a lot of people all over the world that have this ancestry, and my group also, to help them if they want to come back to their roots. And I hear this story all the time, and I'll say to them, I was raised with fear. In my family, we were told there's no such thing as friends. Don't trust anybody outside the family. I don't care if you have a school chum. You don't go to their house. They don't come here. Okay.
Right.
And there was all this fear of outsiders to the family. Why? Because those were the people who tattled or ratted or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
told the authorities about something they saw in somebody's home that might indicate they were engaged in what the Roman Catholic Church called the heresy of Judaizing. And what was that heresy? Of observing Jewish custom and law in the home, privately, secretly in the home. And that's what got our people killed in the Inquisitions.
So this is, yeah. So this fear that has been instilled and that's passed on from generation to generation to not disclose too much information, it's really suppressed the the people who are of Sephardic descent. And many people in like the United States of America and in South America are unawares. They were raised Catholic, and typically I think, I probably would be safe to say the majority of the Sephardic Anusim converted to Catholicism because of the Inquisition. They went all over the globe and they lost their identity in the process. And so now we see this movement afoot of these people of Hispanic and Portuguese descent who are starting to find out things. They're drawn to Israel. They're drawn to the Jewish people, and they don't know about their ancestry, but are beginning to find out. And this is becoming more and more prevalent among this group of people, of Spanish and Portuguese Jews. Tell us about that.
Well, and it's actually all over the world, from Western India, a place called Goa, where Vasco da Gama went, and he took ships and went around the Horn of Africa and landed on the western coast of India, called Goa. So there are Portuguese there who have this ancestry from Vasco da Gama. Okay, and he also then went into Indonesia. So we work with people from Goa. We work with people who today are still living in Indonesia, and of course, all of the major Pacific countries, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines. Okay, there are people with this ancestry. The Spanish ones, of course, are from the voyagers on the Spanish side. Okay, and then all of the Americas, from North America to Central America and the Caribbean, South America, we have groups and communities of people that are from the B'nai Nusim, or if you want to say the crypto Jews. And then all of Europe, all the countries of Europe, there are people living there, and Scandinavia, North African countries, Morocco, for example. We just got in touch with a man from Morocco whose family was forcibly converted by Islam. So there's more than one type of crypto Jewish person. And to be honest with you, a couple of hundred years before the forced conversions in Spain, Maimonides, the famous Rambam, was living in Fez in Morocco. And at the time, the Almohads, Almohads, I'm not sure I'm saying the name correctly, a certain type of Islam people, were doing forced conversions of the Jews. And he wrote a letter to the people of Fez and said, say whatever they want you to say and go home and be a good Jew. In other words, if you have to be a secret Jew, go home, be a Jew in home, in secret. So he wrote this letter 200 years before what happened in Spain and then later in Portugal. And that's what our people did. They went after they were forcibly converted. They went home and they were still Jewish and they still observed Jewish custom, Jewish law as best they could, okay, for centuries, even down to this day. There are people that I know whose ancestors came from Puerto Rico, who still, the grandmother, Obadiah, still lives in the mountains of Puerto Rico, still observing Jewish law to this day. And there are rabbis who don't believe this. There are Jews that don't believe this all over the world. There are Christians, of course, who don't believe this because a lot of our people, they did what they had to do in order to be accepted as Roman Catholic, but weren't necessarily Roman Catholic. Okay. They did what they had to do so they could hide, so that they could live, so that they could survive. And so, even in Latin America today, there are people who want to come back, but their family is still fearful. And so, their family doesn't want them to come back. Because I have to tell you, it wasn't until 1965, Vatican II, that the Roman Catholic Church, the pontiff at that time, Vatican II Council, said and made a statement in the document that they wrote saying, we cannot continue. I mean, these are my words, but it's something along the lines of we cannot continue to blame all Jews for all time for the killing of you know who. Okay. And secondly, that we consider the Jews to be our elder brother in the faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Imagine that. And then 3 years later, the civil government of Spain revoked, officially and formally revoked, what's called the Alhambra Decree, which is what we call the Edict of Expulsion, which expelled the Jews from Spain. So, but that's 50 years ago, okay, roughly. So it's only been the last 50 years or so that people have felt either that it was safe or they didn't care anymore if it was safe to come out and start to look at their ancestry, their, you know, if they have Jewish customs and traditions that were handed down by the women, that's one of the major signs of crypto Judaism. It's only been the past 50 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, there's so little known about the Sephardic Jews. One of the most famous ones that Americans remember is Columbus because he sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Tell us about Christopher Columbus. Was he a Jew or was he a Catholic?
So it's not a very satisfactory answer, but we don't have proof that he was a Jew. There are a few evidences. There were some things that he used to write, and there was a little symbol that he used to put on some of his writings that some people think is a Jewish symbol. We definitely know for sure. We do have proof that some of his crew were secretly Jewish. Okay, were Jews, but they kept it under wraps. Okay, he actually left the day after the Al-Habra decree on Tisha B'Av, and a lot of people don't understand this part, but the decree came out that the Jews had a certain amount of time to leave, and the very next day was when he left. And so obviously the decree was out there. It had been made public. So there were people in his crew that were definitely Jews, and of course in later crews and whatever. And some people say his name actually was Colon, and that he wasn't Spanish, he was Portuguese. I mean, there's if you do a search on the internet about this, there's all kinds of opinions and all kinds of information. But Christopher Columbus himself, we don't know for sure, but we know for sure about some of his crew.
Mm-hmm. So we know that one day God is going to blow the whistle and the exiles are going to return. Do you see this movement as a prophetic movement spoken about by the prophets? Why or why not? And why is this film important for Christians?
Well, I see it as prophetic from many different angles. One is the prophecy in Obadiah that you mentioned, Obadiah verse 20, that says the exiles from Jerusalem at Sepharad, Sepharad is Spain and Portugal, will inherit the cities of the south. Now, we don't know if that's the south the way he understood it in his day, the southern kingdom of Judah, or if it's the south the way it's defined today, modern times, as the southern part of the state of Israel. The flat top of the triangle goes from Jerusalem to Ben Gurion and Tel Aviv, and then the pointed part of the triangle goes all the way down to Eilat, and that's called the Negev. Okay, south of that line is called the Negev, which means south in Hebrew. So we don't know if it was south the way he knew it in his day, or he had actually a prophetic vision of what it would look like today, what we call today the Negev. So, but there's that prophecy, and there's other prophecies like in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 20. At that time I will bring you, and at that time I will gather you in, and I will set you up for renown and praise among all the people of the world. Okay. When I, this is Hashem talking, when I bring back your captivity, says Hashem. So that's the prophet Zephaniah prophesying, saying, this is the word of the Lord. Okay, that these people, Hashem is going to bring back the captivity. Now, who's captive today? There are no Jews in the world who are captive and can't leave, can't come to Israel. Okay, they have the right, they have the ability, we have the law here. There's only one group of people who can't do this, and that's the B'nai U'Nesim of Latin America.
Interesting.
Okay, and what happened was 95 years ago, the Jews in Argentina developed a what they call a takana, which is a community ruling, saying that they would not accept as members in their community any convert or any revert. Now, a revert is what they mean when we say a returnee. So they're talking about me, okay? People like me. They wouldn't accept these people into their communities, okay, until the end of time, not even the end of days, until the end of time. And that decree is still out there. And most of the Jewish communities in Latin America observe that decree. So when our people in Latin America are trying to do the research about their families and come back, either as a convert or a returnee, depending on how much evidence they have. It's all about the evidence for the rabbis, okay? And our people don't mind converting if that's how they have to do it by halakha in order to make it back, okay? They don't mind doing that. But there are some people who have strong enough evidences of their mother's female line, which I had, of course, to become accepted by the rabbis as still Jewish, okay? And we're called a returnee. Well, since they can't join any Jewish communities in Latin American countries, they have been creating their own communities. Again, this has been going on for 30 to 40 to 50 years. Now, what happened in Israel, and this is for fear of the Catholics, I'm absolutely convinced this is done like this because they fear Christianity. They fear, for example, somebody saying, well, the Jews are stealing our people out of the churches, for example, and they're not. These people never really were Christian to begin with, or Catholic, whatever, right, but they just had to hide in Catholic countries. So for whatever reason, that's my opinion, for whatever reason, about 2015 or 2016, the Ministry of Interior developed a policy, and the policy goes like this: anyone who converted not in the context of a recognized Jewish community, but in the context of one of these, what they call emerging communities, that's what they call our communities all around the world. If they converted in the context of an emerging community, they don't qualify for Aliyah under the law of return. So we're blocked. We're barred by a second decree that says we can't make, even if they convert. Now, that's not the same for a returnee, because a returnee is not a convert. So my paperwork from the rabbis, the Beit Din that I went to, was accepted for Aliyah. Okay. But this is for people who don't have strong enough evidence, of their mother's female line or whatever. and they convert. So now they're halakhically Jewish. Okay, by Jewish law, they're Jewish. They've come back, but they can't make Aliyah. How long do you think Hashem is going to allow that to be the case?
Yeah.
No, not if his word is true and he's going to fulfill his promise, the covenant he made to Abraham and his descendants, which is eternal. It's forever. Such an exciting story. Ladies and gentlemen, this coming September 11th and 12th, PJTN will partner with La Anosim for the global screening of this important documentary film, Children of the Inquisition. If you are listening to this podcast and you are not on PJTN's mailing list, I want to encourage you to go to pjtn.org and register today. We will be sending an email with all the details on September 1st so that you can register and you can share the links with your family and friends. In closing, Yaffa Batya, are there any final comments you would like to share with our audience?
Well, the only final comment that I would like to share is that in the first century, and you know this very well, Laurie, the Christians, they were first called Christians at Antioch. They were Philo-Semites. They loved the Jewish people. They joined with the Jewish people in the thought that there was this person who was the Jewish Messiah in that day, which, by the way, all of which had to do with the Roman occupation of Judea. People don't understand how to read the first century writings in the context of the Roman occupation. And when I say first century writings, I'm talking about not just the Christian canon, but also the Nag Hammadi library and the Qumran library of scrolls and all of that. So there's just so much there about the first century. And then it all got changed in the second century with the early second century, with the writings of the early church fathers who were totally against the Jews and carried on this hatred of the Jews that the Roman imperial cult had. So all of that is what I'm writing about in my book, so people can understand there's just a big shift that happened between the first century and even the late first century and then on into the early second century. And if people knew all of this, it would be a different world for them.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so amazing, and we are looking forward to seeing the film. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to go to our website, sign up on pjtn.org so that we can send you the link to this important film. If you are interested in donating to help underwrite the screening of this documentary, please go to pjtn.org. We can't reach our global audience without your financial support. I hope you enjoyed this program. We're going to post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly, rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and also other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. And the watchman, as a watchman, you must sound the alarm, because if you don't warn the inhabitants and you know the truth, you will be held accountable to the people, to any people who fall because you didn't warn them. This is in God's word. You can help share as a watchman to warn the inhabitants of your community, to warn your family, to warn your friends, the people on your list, just simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends, helping to inform and educate them about an issue that most Christians are so unfamiliar with, but it's an important part of history. So please share, like this podcast to help sound the alarm in your community. Remember, Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this effort and more programs like this for just $20 a month. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.